Good morning, everybody. Glad you could join me. Today, this is sort of an outhouse for you, but also kind of not because I want to show you a knife here that the odds of anybody being able to find may be nil to zero, but it was kind of well, I'm going to call it an oddity, but it's not because of the design or style of the knife. It's just one of those things where you just walk into a store. I got this at a very, very old general store that's been in business since the late 1800s. Uh, but you know how you go, like, it's kind of like in some gas stations, you can walk in, right, and find some random knives. This is a trapper model knife. Let me go all the way up so I don't cut myself. Full size trapper. This knife's made in Pakistan. Has no name brand or anything on it. So stick with me, guys. We're going to take a look at this oddball here. Okay, guys. Now this, like I said, came from a place called, well, I'm just not going to put names of stores and stuff out there about permission. I'm sure they wouldn't mind, but it's not like a big chain store. It's a privately owned store. So anyway, now this little guy here, well, it's a full size trapper. It came in a leather belt carry thing, sheath, pretty thin. This probably would not last very long at all. So when I get it in my box of knives, it's more not just to protect the knife. Snap's actually semi-decent, but this leather's pretty thin, lightweight stuff. However, the knife, and I wasn't expecting this, it's pretty decent. It's no case or Rough Rider, but it's not bad, and it was fairly cheap. I think it was like 10 or 15 bucks. No idea the steel. I could not even tell you. All I can tell you, it is a stainless. Now, the trapper blade is typically designed for people that do hunting and fishing, trapping, and stuff like that, because the blades on this knife are strictly designed for processing game animals and stuff. And we have the clip point here, and they even put a swedge up there, and that would be to assist you in making a tiny poke into some furs, especially if you're trying to make money cuts and preserve the hide for selling. So this knife blade here would help facilitate some very, very fine cuts. And in general, like I said, my experience with a trapper growing up through my father, these knives have been used for especially deer. We'll actually do everything from gutting the deer, skinning the hide off the deer, quartering the deer, and even processing the meat with trapper knives. We've done the whole spiel with it. So these are pretty competent blades if you're into the hunting, trapping, animal processing scene. However, guys, this is obviously stuff I do with my knives. We'll work wood, and though they're not really designed for it, if you're careful with these knives, you can use it for such. They will actually work good on wood. Now these have a really acute flat grind. Now, me personally, if I'm more concerned about the skinning of an animal, I'd actually prefer this blade very particular to been a hollow grind and be able to have a very, very keen edge, which usually requires a pretty decent steel, by the way. So we can get some really fine curly cues out of that. Now, real quick, we're going to swap blades. Now, in particular, this blade is kind of like more like your traditional butchering style blade for taking care of your game animals. And that's why you have this flat spot right here. Now, this will ride along the bones, especially if you're cutting the back strap out of a deer, and you can poke a hole into the hide with the tip, ride that up just a little bit, let where we can feel this riding on the spine, and just run it up like a zipper. And they did also put a little bit of a swedge on that one as well. Now, this knife didn't come super sharp, but it came, for what it was, surprisingly sharp, and I've not put an edge on it. It still has the edge as it came from the store, or from Pakistan. As we can see there, that works pretty good. I'd like to keep in mind, what you can do with a knife really depends on your skill with knives, and especially if you've had experience with a multitude of different knives, different profiles, different bevels. They function theoretically, or I mean, not so much theoretically. Not sure what to say. I mean, it's a sharp edge that cuts. You have mechanical limitations, obviously. Like, this is a folding pocket knife, has no locks, has a spring. That tension is what keeps this steady. And this one actually has pretty good tension. But, you got to obviously be careful with these, because you do not ever want to get in a situation where you're pushing up on something to where that can close down on top of your fingers. And some knives of these variety have a pretty strong walk and talk, we call it. That's the noise you'll hear. I'll actually get it closer to the mic. That's the walk and talk. Some of them has got multiple. Now, this is it's got the half stop, but we only get the snap on the full opening. But like I said, that's just something to keep in mind with these, because, they can hurt you if you're not careful with them. But as you can see, where they're not actually really made for processing wood, they'll do a really good job if you use them carefully. There's obviously some limitations to what you can do with them. But, the cool thing is, even if you have one of these in your pocket, you're more of a huntsman, you're a trapper, you can obviously still whittle wood with these. And that's why it's also really nice to have multiple blades. You can say I'm out there, whatever situation happened, I'm having to use it for whittling wood to make pegs, help processing fine stuff for fires. I can save one of these. Of course, I recommend you always bring a method or two to keep your edges up. But say I want to just completely dedicate this particular one here for taking care of animals. So then I can just say, okay, now, since I'm in this crappy situation, I'm just going to dedicate this blade on this knife for any kind of bushcraft survival type things I have to do, cutting cords. Like I said, making fine shavings, you name it. This is going to be the utility blade while I'm in this situation. And that's a pretty nice option to have. Let's see how well she does at cutting some cordage, guys. That wasn't bad at all. That was very little effort. Let's get this little chunk here. A little tiny piece I didn't get. That was the knife's fault. That's mine. I may have to get us a better stump here for these tests, because this thing is all wavy and gnarled up from a chainsaw. So I'm not getting a good proper flat contact here. And that does make the knife look like it's not performing. And it's actually has a pretty good clean cut. All right, now let's go ahead and use the other blade. And like I said, this blade in particular here, if I was actually intending on carrying it, I would definitely do more edge work on this. I'd probably reduce the bevel a little bit on this blade, and I'd want to hone it down to a hair popping. I mean, like one of them deals where you take it across the hair on your hand or your arm, the hair actually just flies out from in front of it and shoots off. So that way, this one is good, proper for taking care of game. But like I said, now, and I'm not being disrespectful or knocking it, but, in the past, anything that was a budget blade that came out like Turkey or Pakistan, the quality was not great. So it's really nice when you do find budget items like this that actually have functionality right out of the box. Like, yes, I would prefer the sharper, and whenever I had it at my convenience, I would do so. But, it'd been nice. Like, I was at that place, I really needed a knife, for example. I mean, I didn't, but, let's say I did, and fundage was short, 10, $15. I got a pretty decently functional knife, and it came sharp enough to do the work I needed it to do. So that was a pretty focus. Gross. There we go. Pretty clean cut. Let's get right into the cardboard cutting. We're going to use our clip point blade. Let's see. Here's a good spot. I can feel that dragging. That wasn't quite a very pretty cut, and I could definitely feel it. Now just to the skin on my finger. Now it feels decently sharp, but it's quite obviously not quite right, because that was not a very clean cut. Let's try over here in the corner. That was a little better, but still, I want to do another slower drag through. Yeah, there's a spot right there. Might have a bit of a burr on it. Yep, so that took right off near that tip, which was a far cleaner cut. So yeah, that's great, because I just found the spot that needed some work. Now, I did notice on this blade too, that right there could be a serious issue. That came that way. There's like a big pit here and somewhat of a crack there. Now, that could have happened through some kind of a heat or cryo treatment that they were doing for these knives, and it may have been done incorrectly. So we have caused a fracture right there. So that's definitely not good. But, for a $10 knife is what it is. Now, this blade came out pretty good. There's no such defects on this one. So again, let's hit our cardboard. Ooh, that was pretty good. That was a nice clean cut. Try to shave off the lid. There we go. Little fuzzy chunk there. All right, guys, real quick. This will tell a little bit more here. Let's get where we can cut a little bit of hair. I'm actually seeing some fly off from away from the knife. Most of it's on the knife. So that actually did pretty good. Now we got to check our clip point. Yep, and again, I felt that little bit of a dull spot there in that one section we talked about earlier. So there is a small section right through here that's not quite as sharp as the rest of it. But that, I honestly think, would literally take 10 minutes at the most to take care of that. Just, some stones, using just simple hand honing. Okay, so what do I think? I think that for the price, this ain't too bad. Uh, Country origin notwithstanding, I mean, it came decently sharp so far, even despite that ugly spot there on this blade. That's right there. I've used this for just every time I pick up a knife. Usually, I'm whittling with it, so it just has. After I first got it, which has been many years ago, probably 7, 8 years ish ago. This has whittled quite a bit of wood because when I first get a knife, that's the first thing I do with it for a while. I just play with it, whittle a bunch of wood. It's held up pretty good to that. Now, just for strictly processing game animal, I think this thing would last decades, to be honest with you, as long as you did your part, kept it clean, don't let it get a bunch of blood and other animal fat and stuff, and leave it on the knife and don't properly clean the knife after use, properly hone it up. I don't doubt that this thing won't last decades. It's basic, simple, but it works. And that's another beauty of functionality of simple stuff. Now, like I said, I do love good modern folding knives, have the nice locks on them, far safer. I'm a huge fan of those, so don't think I'm knocking those. But I'm kind of old school in a lot of ways too. I really like this old stuff. It has a place in my heart, in my memories. Just it was a part of my life growing up. So yeah, there's maybe a lot of nostalgia bias, and that that's fair. But the fact that I use these and so many people before me has used them, like I said, older generations. I seen these old farmers, my father, using these old traditional classic knives and just getting it done with them. All the jobs that they did, and the knives very rarely ever failed. Like I said, I think the most common failure ever seen in some of the old more classic knives, I can think of like the old buck folding knives. Usually the tip snapped on them, but outside that was about their only flaw because the steel was a budget steel, but it was made to take an edge once you got it on there. It was good and sharp. It held it for a long time, and now they were very difficult to sharpen if you let that edge go too far. It was kind of a pain in the butt to resharpen them, but if you did your part, kept them honed up when they needed it, boy, them things would just go and go and go. And they were not an expensive knife. So, uh, it, it, I mean, even if you look at it from a collector standpoint, when you buy older traditional stuff, it kind of just feels like you're in a piece of history. But to me, they have a lot of functionality already tried and true. It's always, it's been tested. All these old classical knife styles and materials and stuff that are still being made today. I mean, they did their tour of duties and have been doing it for decades and decades and decades. Some of them, well before I was ever even born. So I don't want to ever make everybody think that, you see a lot of more of the modern stuff here, which I do absolutely love, but I don't ever dismiss the older classical traditional stuff because it's still fantastic. Some of you have to be far more careful with, like I said, with this, there's no locking mechanism on this, so you have to be super careful and not let that blade close up on your hand. But once you get that down and you get to learn how to properly sharpen and hone knives, these are just an absolute joy to use, especially, if you are out there hunting, you're processing an animal. I don't know, there's something about these that are just different versus, say, this. Now, sure, this thing can do it, no problem. And not even considering the sentimental value that this particular knife has to me, but, has a fantastic lock. I never really have to consider worrying about this in practical use. closing up and severely injuring me. And that's fantastic. That's a nice peace of mind to have. Like I said, that's also why you'll see me carrying a lot of those knives, because I do consider prepping, survival, and bushcraft as part of my life. So I do tend to carry stuff that's more directed at that I can use for those things and have the most safety net with me. Now, mind you, I can always carry that knife, say, in my left pocket, and this I could throw down in my right pocket. Say I'm going hunting, and I can use that strictly for processing animals and save that spider coat for emergency purposes, bushcraft survival stuff. So that's food for thought for you guys. If you ever get a chance to get some good old classic fashioned, like there was way back in the day, get them. They're fantastic. Just if you're new to the knife world, or you're just new to the old stuff, there's a very small transition kind of phase you'll have to go through there. It's pretty simple. Don't be afraid to get one of these. Take your time, practice with them, be safe with them. But I think you'll find, like me, you'll come to really enjoy them. There's something about them, you know. So with that, guys, I thank you very kindly for watching. I appreciate your time, and I'll see y'all in another video.